All right. While we're waiting for our guest today, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a reaction or video over the last few days. On Thursday, I had a bit of an argument with a very close friend of mine who I've known since childhood. So I'm going to catch you up on this. Last year at this time, we had just launched Opinionated Collective Sports Talk, which has been reworked this year to now be probably like a little video series and then maybe a podcast concept later. So what happened was in February or March, he popped the question to his wife. This is somebody who I've known since high school. So that was okay, but then two events happened between that. There was the bachelor party in the summer, then the wedding. Before that, our best hip and knee specialist at Optum, whose name I'm not going to reveal, at 42 years old, his wife was pregnant and he just had his first son last month. So those three combination of events unfortunately tossed me into a situation where my mental health, for lack of better words, basically went south for the year. It was as I was going through therapy and processing my sister's wedding in the last 2 years, which all started during COVID, the theme showed up of the fact that I feel behind everybody else who was given, the opportunities that they deserved coming out of college. I didn't get those opportunities until finishing college in 2021. So 2 years after I graduated, 2019, into COVID, did I finally get my first full-time job. So in some sense of the word in my career, I'm behind, and this has always been hard to process. We are supposed to all uniquely run our own races, but unfortunately, sometimes it's just not that easy. So I'm going to go through a few series of emotions so that you can gain a better understanding of why I feel this way. On Thursday, part of what was said was two comments. Comment number one was basically, your mental health is very largely tied and related to social media toward comparing yourself. You should not be comparing yourself to others. Okay, at 38 years old, I will say this after going to high school, in the Cross River area. While 25% of that statement is actually correct, unfortunately, before social media, when you live in certain areas of the United States of America, wealthier, affluent communities, I'm sorry to burst his bubble on this, but using social media is the easy way out. When you grow up around people with more money and they can afford, and their parents and, them later on in life can afford, nice things, they can buy a house, they can take vacations, they have, extra discretionary income to spend, and you've been stuck in retail for up to, let's say, 15 or 20 years, 15 to 20 years average of most of your career, and you're only starting to make salary now, not only do you feel behind, but it's not great for your mental health. So in that sense, a lot of mental health is tied to two key factors. Factor number one, the opportunities that you are given coming out of high school and or college, especially college. That first job opportunity, whether you get it through a recruiter and a hiring manager is lucky enough to hire you, or you're given it through a family member, that makes the difference very early on in your career and sets the tone for your career. Unfortunately, most people don't understand that. And that leads me to some of how I'm feeling while doing this, while waiting on the guest today. The first few emotions that, needed to be processed was any which way form of this. Unfortunately, oftentimes, most friends would rather sit there and criticize and think this is being helpful and then give advice. I saw something on LinkedIn that I thought was very remotely interesting. And what was interesting about it is this. A master connector, whose name I'm not going to reveal, who's part of my mastermind group, had this to say: Are the people you're listening to giving you advice or mentorship? I've learned to ponder these few things before listen to someone consider them a mentor. Do you have fruit on the tree? Are they in are they in the life where I want to be? Have they accomplished what I want to accomplish, or are they working off of a theory? Are they physically willing to take the time to help me, or do they say, try that and let me know how you make out? If they are willing to help you, do they skin in the game? In other words, if you don't succeed, does it negatively impact them, or the opposite? It benefits them if you succeed. Do you have something like a business project that you can work on together? So it's a theoretical mentorship, but it's based on actual application. Imagine a coach that never got to see you on the playing field or in the weight room. How can they effectively coach you? Do they have a real relationship? Do they really know you and your current situation, along with your specific strengths and weaknesses? Many people consider high-level public figures mentors, even though they only know them from afar. But to me, the advice they ha- but but to me, that's advice that's they give has no clue as to how their advice can fit your specific situation. It may even be 180 degrees from what one truly needs. To me, having a mentor that checks all the boxes is so vital. Assuming they are much like a GPS is integrated seamlessly into your car, the presence of a mentor seeks out mentors who resonate with your goals and values, whether through attending motivational speaker events or joining mentoring programs. Actively engage with your mentor, leveraging their insights to navigate both professional and personal landscapes. So basically, what this is effectively getting to now is the root of many people's problems nowadays. Most of our supposed friends at a certain point have things that happen within their lives that they're able to do within their income. Like, for example, with him, who 10 years ago, his father helped him get a job at the landscape architecture firm he works at here in Westchester County. So, in that sense, when you already live in a community where, parents and everything is interconnected and you stay within that community, you're going to be connected to great opportunities. Whereas when you look at somebody else's situation, let's look at me, for example. I moved away from my old high school community, unfortunately, because I had to. Mother left for Long Island. Father was living in DC at the time, and there wasn't much that could be done other than I stayed with dad, for effectively 2009 to 2014, so part of a decade. And then I came back to Westchester to live on my own after 1 year of experimenting in the DC area. In other words, the first opportunities that I had when I came back were basically custodial cleaning and retail. So basically, if I have to build a life based off of that, then of course I'm going to be behind. While it's understandable, most people who would supposedly feel sorry for that, to a certain point you learn later on, they don't know how to help. And where this gets more complicated is, especially when you're a high functioning autistic adult like myself. All right, you're in. You there?
Hi.
Hey, I was just doing a little commentary on some stuff that happened during the week that I'll finish up once you leave.
Okay.
Basically, before we get started, I'm processing a situation with a very old friend who just got married last year, and then he had the nerve to criticize me and what I'm doing here with not just the podcast but everything else.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, unfortunately, one thing we're going to go into today, especially with your story, is before I do the introduction, I'm just going to mention something. I read your story, and your story unfortunately reminds me of what happened with, now in my own life, but also in my childhood.
Okay.
So we're going to discuss a little on that because Rosita's story in volume 2 also touched a nerve within me about this, because that is a theme for some people. So, all right, everyone, welcome to Pick Your Brain podcast today. Today, I have my fifth social worker who's doubled as a career coach, but she also had the honor to be a co-author in Latinx in Social Work Volume 1. I have Paula Mcmillion Perez here, who's also an LMSW, a licensed master social worker. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to touch a little bit. We're going to have her start with, I'm going to read a little glimpse from her story, which was, if I remember correctly, oil tap meets sancocho.
Close. Oil down meets sancocho.
Oil down. Okay, fair enough. All right. So I'm going to take a little excerpt from it. And then, okay. Which part of it did I like? All right, we're going to start with the first one. My mother, who immigrated to this country from the island of Grenada in 1967, knew that a good education opens doors. It was rooted in my identity as long as I could remember this. This was something that I openly accepted, but what I would learn is that acceptance in other areas would not come easy. And then the part of your story that actually stood out to me was this. I have nothing against my original community, but when, for example, your public elementary school in the North Bronx, what part of the North Bronx did you live in?
The Norwood section.
Norwood. Is that next to Fordham?
It's a little further north. So Bainbridge, Gun Hill, it's maybe a 5-minute drive from Yonkers. So it's Norwood,
Okay, I
then
was about to
Beyond, then
ask, is that
Yonkers.
close to McLean Avenue, Yonkers?
Yeah, just a little further south than that. But yeah, you could walk it.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm sure that was a very nice area of the Bronx, but I'm also very sure, similar to what I probably experienced in high school, when they said you sound like a white girl. And then at one point you said in the story, I was trying to be accepted by white people or something along those.
There is a big part of it, especially as a child, where you are seeking acceptance. But as a kid, and I mentioned, I did have West Indian parents, like I had to do vocabulary builder on the weekend. So my vocabulary may have sounded different than other people, but maybe it was the tone of my voice. I spent years trying to figure out what it was and trying different things to sound different, to be accepted visually, because I felt like I wasn't, and it didn't always shake out.
So, interestingly enough, and don't get me wrong, the education in my old community, which was Cross River, it was a fantastic education because you're in the northern part of Westchester County, close to the border of Danbury, Connecticut. There's nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, you and Rosita both experienced what I grew up with, which is majority white people. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but as you mentioned in this, which I caught, is not only were you culturally raised differently than most of the white kids, you also were, the child of two immigrants. So imagine now for somebody like me, not only what after at the point when we were, separately young, since you're only a little older than me, imagine growing up in a very affluently white community where in the 1990s, as I mentioned on your show, even not only did they not understand autism, they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what ADHD was either. And the main author of this, Erica, has mentioned it before, even to me back in September. ADHD should be really seen as a superpower, not what it actually is, which is I have another friend who does career coaching outside of work, whose name is Elvie. Her husband's from France, he had a medical condition, which was a brain tumor that he survived, but our country decides all of a sudden developmental learning disability and medical condition are the same thing, which, by the way, I'll say this now on my podcast. No, it really isn't. I'm sorry. Try again. They're not. They're two completely different things.
I can agree with you on a lot of those fronts. I do want to clarify, though, that while there was diversity in my upbringing, there was a good portion of white and also a good portion of Black that both accused me of trying to sound white. But I will say that there are also medical professionals as it pertains to ADHD, that have identified that it's not an attention deficit per se, but it is actually an impulsivity disorder. So it's really interesting to learn from different members of the community how they perceive things, and also the experience of your friend and her husband, how things are determined in other countries. And then when we come here with our medical documentation, educational documentation in that realm, and that things get completely turned upside down because it doesn't fall underneath the guise of the way things are handled here in the United States.
Because our education system, for better or for worse, is a legitimate behind century dumpster fire. And I'm being really nice about this because I unfortunately will say this. You probably experienced this while being agency career coach or career counselor, which we're going to get into throughout the discussion. Education has, unfortunately, a very, very, very long way to go. And I'm not saying this because I want to be nice about it. I'm saying this because it's unfortunately a necessity. And now we have the new college graduates who are basically calling it out and basically saying, no, this is no longer acceptable.
Yes, and I'm glad that you actually called that out, because for some folks feel, oh, it's millennials, younger millennials, they're always telling you what they're
Gen Z
not
is
going to want
much
to
more
do.
vocal about this. Just look at their TikToks, whether I agree with it or not. Which
Yes, but I'm just using
unfortunately,
millennials as an example in this. But yes, Gen Z does fall underneath this because they are much more interested in advocating for themselves and their needs, more so than earlier generations, for a variety of different reasons. And yes, education in this country has a very long way to go. And one of my largest gripes is, even though there is talk and there are services available for tailored learning experiences, differentiated learning experiences, we are a country that puts most of our resources into general education, when that is not a scope that fits the needs of all.
correction,
Amongst other things.
correction. But look at what our federal government allocates all our money to.
Yeah.
Weapons, missiles, bombs, imprisoning people who disagree with you for absolutely no reason other than the fact that, yeah, I'm in power.
Yeah, like a lot of funds are allocated to things that the regular
I forgot,
lay people like us wouldn't support.
Isn't that socialism when you jail people?
Yeah.
Oh wait, I forgot. We're supposed to call it capitalism.
Capitalism cannot blanket everything, despite the efforts of some.
No. I just read another interesting post from somebody who this was a very interesting take. This guy's name is Roderick Mann. When you get people too far to the right, you wind up with fascism. When you get people too far to the left, they call it communism. But what it actually is just policies that you and I have spoken about that make sense. Like what Bernie Sanders has basically been, his whole platform has been, which is basically, why don't we stop giving money to rich people who no longer need it? They have more than enough money.
Yeah.
But anyway,
multiple lifetimes.
multiple generational wealth. All right, so during your childhood part of the story, what was your original career, ideal dream career that you had wanted to do before, I guess, you decided maybe I want to be a social worker?
To be perfectly honest with you, when I refer in the book to my childhood, I'm speaking about elementary school. And during that time, I actually wanted to become a firefighter. I didn't think of medical professions. I didn't think of other helping professions. I wanted to be a firefighter. I was very interested in the science of it. But as you can see, that did not come to fruition.
Well, because there's a few reasons why I believe people want to become firefighters. I wanted to do it too. First and foremost, before I even touch on the pension part of it, the pension part of it, what looked good about it, it was kind of what we would call a flexible schedule.
Yeah.
New York City, you'll see more action. Westchester County, it's very spanced out. It largely depends what level you want to go to with firefighting. But it's all around, it's kind of like a laid back career to an extent where you can still do other things, but get a guaranteed pension at the end of it. The only unfortunate reason I think most people end up not pursuing it much more is because you have to be on a wait list for a very long time. And then the prerequisite is you have to pass with above a 90, and not everyone can do that.
Yeah, I was on the list twice and I was in the 80s. So my number did not come up.
Yeah. So you fell into, so was your preference social work, or how did you end up in career coaching, which would basically be job counselor when we were growing up?
So when I was in middle school into high school, I worked in a summer camp. And during the year, I worked in an after school program. So I predominantly worked with youth. And it was something that I really enjoyed. So when I got to college, I was like, oh, like I want to be a psychology major. Like I want to be a psychologist. So that's where my mindset was. I didn't have the knowledge at the time to even identify that social work was a profession. And when the school that I went to for undergrad, it's identified as human services there. And I just so happened to need another class to fit in my schedule. So I took an intro to human services class and I really loved it. And then I took another one in human services and I loved that. So I decided to also take that on as a major, psychology and human services. Not until I took my first social work class, I learned how much more broad it was, because I did have a passion for working in the community with the community. And also because I enjoyed working with kids, I figured it was a good way for me to put all of my passions together in terms of working with people, working in my own neighborhood, being able to uplift the community. So as a result of that, looked into master's levels programs, but it wasn't ready. But to speak to your question about career coaching, that was actually a function of one of my jobs. And one of the things about it was just supposed to be a subsection of it. But one of the things I realized was that the individuals that were coming to me felt like they weren't getting what they needed in terms of like, oh, I'm supposed to have these skills, or this person said, put this on your resume. They're not really going to check to see if you know how to do this. And then you're supposed to figure it out. And I'm like, no, there are places that when you interview, they may ask you for a work sample. You want to be prepared and not appear as though you are being fraudulent on your application. So what are some of the ways that we can go about learning these skills? And this was before, YouTube got super big and, not YouTube University. So
when
it's
you
harder to
speak of
come by some of them.
fraud, when you speak of fraud, it's very interesting because I'm going to use a sports example. Remember how Georgia O'Leary got caught at Notre Dame for resume fraud? That was huge back in the 2000s.
Honestly, I don't recall. So you're gonna have to
That
give me
was
a little background.
that was an example of what you're saying, which is you don't want to lie on your resume about certain experiences because they'll call you out on it, especially in a high level sport.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, depending on if he fudged a reference check. But yes, as far as because I will tell you a little funny story. Job counselors are actually very big within autism.
Okay.
If you work for a nonprofit agency, usually that idea although I'm surprised it's now mainstream to this point where nowadays they can effectively become a career coach or a career advisor at like big universities, or potentially for, they want to be working for like Fortune 500 companies or something like that. I originally always thought of this as more of kind of a nonprofit college thing, but now because of social media, it's gotten more mainstream because people want to do it privately, even though it was really, an organizational type of a career path potentially. I didn't realize that it was a subsection of social work, but it does make sense at some level. Now, let me ask you this: when you were going through those social work programs, what's the best way I can ask this question? What were the popular positions aside from therapists that they were recruiting for? Because within the last 2 years, I've seen you can do a lot more. Like, for example, with a social work background, you could do public policy analysis. You could become a lobbyist. Damery Bonilla Rodriguez was an example of that with a social work background. You can also do grant writing. Now, what were they recruiting more for? Because I remember, for example, therapy and anything clinical was always high turnover. And then they were also low wage, low salary.
So for me, I can admit that I wasn't part of like an active recruitment process, but I knew specifically that there were schools like the larger universities in New York City, they have different tracks. I didn't want to be put in a place where I had to choose whether it was clinical policy and administration. They had, depending on which school, they had other ones. So I chose to go to a generalist practice school because one of the concerns that I had was that if, let's say, for the sake of argument, I chose a clinical track or I chose a policy track, that most of the things that I was learning or would be learning would be focused in those areas. And I know that I have a passion for community. So I wanted to get a generalist approach so I could pretty much learn all of what social work had to offer and then make a decision from there. At the time when I was in school, it was very popular to choose or to talk about going into clinical practice because people wanted to open their own private practices or work in psych hospitals. Then there are the people that wanted to go to schools, not just because they like working with children, but the assumption of summers off and things of that nature. I hear, especially as a former professor, that a lot of that is still the same in terms of what folks go into it with the expectation of. And some, because of their field placements, learn that, you know what, yes, I can do this, but maybe this isn't where my passion lies. So my journey was a little bit different in terms of what it looked like. Like I
So
made up my mind.
for some of the other peers in your book, who I believe a majority of them probably chose clinical because it was what they were more interested in.
That could be a part of it, but I know some of the co-authors and just conversation, they've tried other subsections of the work and they were drawn for one reason or another, or they do multiple. One of the benefits of social work is that we usually don't just have one role. Some people will say that's because we're not making any money, but that's not always accurate. Because the field is so broad, there are things that kind of I don't want to say merge, but there's a lot of overlap. So if you have one section of skills, even clinical, you can roll that into something else that's community based or is in education or is in nonprofit or is in government. But you just have to decide how you want to best utilize those skills, because one of the joys of social work is that we have a lot of transferable skills. In the business sector, I'm seeing more and more people ending up in DEI roles that are social work, or ending up in people management that are social work. But if a counterpart was hired with another set of training or degree, they would look at the work differently. So it does depend on a few different factors, how you position yourself and also how you advocate for the needs of whichever population that you're engaging with.
I have two issues with DEI. Not to say that I don't think it's done. It's been effective in a lot of senses, but a lot of those DEI people fall into a couple different categories. I always thought of DEI as more people from an educational background made sense for something like that because they were directly teaching young students, and that's where it would make sense. I can see where it makes sense in a social work setting, but the biggest problem with them is this: there are multiple groups that some of them represent, but the one group personally that they're overlooking would be what we now call neurodivergence. So basically, anyone with Asperger's, ADHD, Asperger's is now autism. Whatever you want to call it is whatever you want to call it. But they're not looking at people like myself either as a group that, has the same needs as, for example, we've done a lot for other groups, but we don't come to the table with this group.
I could
As
agree
I
with
said
that.
on your podcast. I said this directly on your podcast and you didn't disagree with me because not every the other issue with DEI is not all of them want to hear the truth either. And the truth is you might represent the needs of the Black community. We have done much for the Black community to get them, in this country toward things like path to home ownership, reasonably good careers, getting into government, getting into nonprofit, which are two very popular sectors where I've seen this myself from volunteering. But what have we done for people like myself? What have we done for people like myself other than basically apply a 20th century mindset of, oh well, it's okay for you to be working a 22.76 an hour job or something like that? This is improvement. No, it isn't. This is exactly what I can't go and argue within my own community because, like you say, mindset is a huge problem right now with people and they just don't want to hear it. But, even in my old community or DEI, they don't want to hear it either. So it's like hitting your head against the wall.
Because a part of it, or a big part of it, in my opinion, is that it leans on the personal work. So imagine you have a large agency, you have, like, let's say, even if you don't have a DEI coordinator, you contract out. The employees that are there, they need to be willing and able to do the work of DEI, not just sit for the training, whether it's a series. It has to be ongoing, living, breathing work, whether you have a consultant, a coach come in regularly. It's not just a performative action, which is part of the problem. But to speak to what you were saying more specifically is, yes, this needs to be nuanced. If the neurodiverse community is not accurately represented, that is a problem because we are large members of the workforce. The same way our learning styles may look and feel different, that's okay because you know what? That can be addressed. And I think one of the larger problems is putting money behind actually having a realistic needs assessment for you to learn what exactly is needed if you don't know, because I'm not expecting everyone to know how to effectively target every population, but when the information is that can benefit from support, structure, education, scaffolding, and you don't know how to do that, these are the people you speak to find out what they need, where they are struggling, where are the gaps, and then you teach yourself or get the training so that you're able to be more equitable in your service provision. That's the biggest problem that I have.
So, okay, so we both agree on this, which is the fact that if somebody's weak in an area, all you have to do is make more of an effort in the
Yeah.
area. But it looks like you're choosing not to
Yes.
because I don't know if skin color plays a portion in this, but sometimes I believe it does. But maybe you would be more able to address that. Do you believe that plays a part in this?
I do believe that it plays a part, and I do feel very
So
strongly
what
about
could
the
we
fact. Oh,
do?
sorry.
What could we do to get? And I'm not saying that they're in essence wrong. What can we do to address this? Because I honestly hate to say it, but when sometimes I look at the mainstream media and you have people polarizing like Joy Reid going around calling a white person a white supremacist, how do you compete with that? How do you communicate with somebody like that has that belief that, oh, you're white, your opinion doesn't matter, you have X, Y, and Z available to you? Actually, no, I don't, because I don't live within a rich community. Here are a couple fun facts for you to add to this conversation. Opportunities you were presented and opportunities I was presented. Opportunities I was presented were basically low wage because unfortunately somebody's parents, didn't know how to basically put their differences aside and do what was right for their son. So I don't blame them, but that would have been a huge look. You two can hate each other as much as you want, but you now have a son who's in his late 30s who's looking for guidance. And I know a lot of neurodivergent people will probably more than be able to relate to this, especially if you ended up with parents who divorced. Why are you two still hating each other at this late point in your own life and then not realizing, oh, hey, our son is still struggling and can't even purchase a house at this point? Maybe we should have decided, put our differences aside and come up with a solution. Here's a good example. I'll use education since that was also an area from career coaching that you're an expert in. Can you expect that there was an article, which I'm probably going to attach when I do this video, when I go do links later, from the Indiana Public Policy Institute about what jobs fit neurodivergence. So there were 4 categories. Guess which one of the 4 categories, unfortunately, I ended up pigeonholed in. But even my best friend 2 nights ago didn't want to hear this. Retail and customer service. These are not good jobs for people on the spectrum.
Yeah, the structure.
Anybody else says, you are not qualified to tell me what I am unqualified to do unless you have walked a mile in my shoes.
Bingo.
So if you're telling me that I have now improved at $22 an hour, sure. But there are 3 factors for neurodivergence that have never been addressed. Cost of housing, which is the biggest one. Biggest one. So what do you expect me to do on 22 an hour? Rent a crappy room or live with my mother for the rest of my life, which is not necessarily possible, while you take away massive corporate profits. But you don't want to share it with me. You don't want to make it easier for me to obtain a role that might pay a little better. This is where the disconnect with some of my old community exists, because if you actually put me among your own, community that you related to very well, actually, I have more in common with basically at this point, Black women, Latinx, people of color. And yet I came from an entire white community. Go figure. Where most people, mommy and daddy, were driving BMWs, Mercedes-Benz. They had big houses. If you were lucky to be as a, Black kid, like somebody I graduated with who's now a practicing doctor, where his mom and dad, like yours, moved here from Nigeria, you had to have 6 figures just to live up there and have PhDs. And I'm not joking either. Just to live in the northern Westchester area. 2 Black parents would literally have to be practicing physician or PhD level.
Meet certain criteria to be included in areas, in communities. Yes, these are things that I have heard of significantly.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying it from personal experience. I saw it myself.
No, I've seen this too. In the Riverdale section of the Bronx has a very affluent population.
Well, yeah,
it had been a running joke.
The Orthodox Jewish population.
Yeah, it had been a running joke when I was a kid. Like, oh, like you're gonna get fancy, or you're gonna get big and move to Riverdale. Like that was out of reach for many of us.
Which is why I said to you at the start, honestly, at this point in my life, and I love that community. One of your co-author number 2 said it best. Coming from those communities, people like this just throw around money like it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's not an impressive.
That's the go-to.
Yeah. But you don't make somebody feel bad by saying, well, I can do this for you. Like, for example, cover a meal or food and drinks, or, you can come to my bachelor party. I'll pay for a hotel for 2 nights. And I'm looking at it now. As I've been doing the podcast in the fall, I interviewed someone from LinkedIn who's a very young boomer himself, age 64, who had a very interesting life post NYPD. And that guy was very interesting to me because he doesn't go around, from how he posts for the people that I grew up with, he doesn't flaunt money. And this is somebody who was a police officer who had to retire 14 years in because of an injury.
Hmm. I mean,
He's
and
an
there could be a variety of different reasons for that. So I could see why it would be an interesting perspective to explore with him.
Yes, and it made for a very interesting episode because we could talk about everything from experience on the police, how he thinks the police are completely at this point corrupt and beyond whatever. He also is no fan of the current mayor of New York City, who nobody likes at this point. I don't even think, if I'm correct, I don't even think Black people like the guy.
I have heard a variety of different responses.
Not
I
promising.
not promising. No, I don't know what it's gonna look like in terms of reelection, but I'll be waiting with bated breath like many other New Yorkers.
I wouldn't be surprised if he either gets a challenger or Sliwa tries running again.
I mean, Sliwa may try running again.
Yeah, but Sliwa wasn't that much better of an alternative. But anyway, in terms of my next question for you, when you went to become a career coach, what was involved education wise? Did you
At
have to
the
take an,
oh,
did you have to
sorry.
take an extra certification?
At the time, no, because one of the things was it was a part of my role. It wasn't my only role, but in the role that I was in, the requirement was to have a bachelor's of art, bachelor's of science. So basically having conferred a bachelor's degree and sitting for what the agency determined was appropriate training to provide career counseling and support. But I will be honest, the training that I did participate that I can recall and that I remembered wasn't supremely helpful to me because it was more of a cookie cutter, like everyone takes the same training type of provision, which I really didn't appreciate because everyone has different needs, how they approach things. They have different learning styles, different skills and abilities. Also, they may be coming from different socioeconomic and cultural statuses that impact how they're looking at their job prospects and how they're looking at their presentation. So I came at it more from a mindset perspective, which I think at the time spoke to what I learned as it pertained to psychology and social work, because just like you mentioned earlier, a lot of what transpires is based on mindset. So working with people on their mindset surrounding careers, surrounding being coachable, being open, how to receive and take feedback was more so the lens that I came from and why I felt like while I was in that role, it was much more successful for me.
Ah, okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So it's interesting because I think this is the problem with trying to take career coaching to platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram when you've either been in an HR background or you're just trying to do something with it because you're more interested in the money in the monetized aspect of it. But you're right about one thing because we all unfortunately have different needs.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of funny because if I was going to privately spend the money on a career coach, I will tell you from 2015, it didn't work with a nonprofit job developer because the what she knew, even though I got 6 interviews that year, and what we look at now, and this is back in 2014 or 2015, Madeline mentioned to me that in 2017, 2018, after she left, one of her mental health clinic jobs at that point, she noticed that the economy had already started going more automated with applications. So whatever everyone was utilizing, even younger career coaches now, when they do it privately, is whatever worked for you isn't going to work for people today with how advanced these ATS systems are.
Yes, and ATS was basically and still is a giant pain for many people. And on the off chance, because I don't like really do too much of this anymore, but when I do work with some social work strategy clients, especially if they're looking for new roles, one of the things we talk about in great detail is how to hack ATS, because it is a system that has eliminated the need for hiring managers or individuals on the hiring team to physically look through people's cover letters and resumes to move to the next step. So it's like you just are literally playing a game in order to be able to be granted the access at times just to a phone interview or maybe a level 1 interview, because now, as you know, interviews are 3, 4, sometimes 5 steps. You have to do a work product. You have to identify what your specific skills and abilities are. What would you do in this role? And even if they don't give you an offer or hire you, that work product that you did as a result of your 3, 4, and 5 interviews could very well be something that that company utilizes to make money, even though you got nothing off of that free labor. So it's really important to understand how these systems work so that we can be able to utilize our skills more effectively to get where we need to be, because a lot of it is not determined to get you through. It is not trying to do that. It is trying to weed things out. We're not weeds. We are people. We have needs, we have desires, and we want to be able to take care of ourselves.
So the comment, which when you came on, I was in the middle of saying in regards to my best friend, is when I told him there were other roles that I wanted to perform that I knew I was qualified to do, he literally sat there and told me on Thursday, interesting to what you're saying about being weeds, you're not qualified to be an analyst. I'm like, okay. Even though 2 years later, now that I've been taking some doing some upskilling with Udemy, everyone sees what I've been doing with the podcast, how I've created content, how I've been able to, not only analyze the needs of neurodivergent or autistic people, grow a social media, grow a following to 64 subscribers, grow a LinkedIn, and yet I'm still trapped in customer service. And it's not that I don't understand where he was saying that wording.
Yeah.
It didn't trigger me. It's like, you're 10 years ahead of me. You just got married. You have the nerve to literally criticize me to my face. You just literally told me doctors are drug dealers when this is the only thing supposedly right now that I'm allowed to do, which is customer service. Where else would I be supposedly performing this? It's like, at this point, I'm going to ask a very interesting question, especially not just as, leewaying to a little bit about entrepreneurship or solopreneurship, but even just at a point in your life, where do people 10 years, 15 to 20 years get to sit there and tell me, either you're not qualified, you should be grateful for what you have, which is basically just effectively another form of shaming somebody.
I don't think that anyone gets to be able to do that. But
Or
I
look
do.
down on somebody, because honestly, even though he's my best friend and it was well intentioned, the wording was bad.
Yeah.
That's why I cut somebody out who was also our mutual best friend, because the guy literally went to tell me the following. The person I cut off told me, you suck at podcasting. All you're good at is creating content. You're not a business person. You don't know how to balance a budget, do this or that. And then I basically gave the guy the finger and said, you know what? Get out of my life. That's it. I'm done with you. We're never talking again.
I'm proud of you for having that boundary, because you do not need people in your life that are not willing to uplift and support you. Yes,
But
there may be
that's the
things that you
problem.
could
That
learn,
goes back to you.
but
That goes back to your story in the comment about wanting to be accepted by the white kids. I will tell you from my own experience, honestly, you're not missing anything, because as much as I appreciate that community, as much as I appreciate white people along the way, there are a lot of problems in this community that they have a bad habit of doing. They tell the black community how to raise their kids, but then they don't want to fix their own friends or children's problems. They put the blame on somebody else when half the time the blame is really partly statements that they make.
Yeah, and these were things
They
that as
resort
a
to giving
child
one size
couldn't
fits all
grasp.
financial advice.
Guys, yeah.
Okay, if I want one size fits all financial advice, I'll go torture myself and at least laugh at how dumb Dave Ramsey sounds with the market that he's talking to, or Suze Orman or Jim Cramer, who have all made terrific careers in what they're doing, within the personal finance realm, but not everyone can actually take that advice
Yeah.
that they give. And
Yeah.
it's not to say that they're bad people, it's that they're speaking to certain demographics.
Yeah, the demographics that have historically worked for them. And there are other demographics, and I'll use myself as an example. I don't budget. Like, it's not a skill that I have. If anything, it has cost.
Budgeting is a very difficult skill. And unfortunately, the problem that most people don't understand with budgeting is there's two different things that my best friend doesn't understand because he's a civil engineer. I am a business person. You did not learn accounting. You learned math that was related to engineering.
Yeah,
Do not
very
tell me
specific.
how to budget, because the problem in accounting that you often run into from business school is problem I have right now, which is with one salary, is business person understands it's not a spending problem, it's a revenue problem. I have a revenue problem.
Problem.
I need a second and third income. I don't, and then that would make it possible to save and cut some level of expenses. Here's another popular one I just ran across on Instagram. A debit card is a bad tool. Don't use a debit card. Just put all your money on a credit card. And now look at the mess that this country is in, because that's the financial advice. Just put everything on a credit card.
Yeah, but if you don't have the money to pay it off at the end of the month and then interest charges, and that's part of the struggle. If you don't have, I'm just going to say basic, and basic can mean different things for different people. If you don't have basic financial skills and you read something like that, oh, put everything on a credit card and pay it off, you're like, oh, that's easy. I can do that. But if you
Actually,
don't
no, it
have the
isn't, because
skills,
I've tanked three credit cards, and I'm paying one back right now that is finally trimming down to about $1,000. I have two others for smaller limits. I went over them and I'm paying them off slowly. You can't just keep swiping. Yeah, I
yeah,
stopped swiping. I leave them as they are, and I just provide cash for everything.
yeah, you found a system that works better for you. That may
Because
work for other
once I
people,
restore the
but
credit
not everyone.
cards back down to below 100, I'm only going to use them for small things because I disciplined myself with the cash. Therefore, some of the financial people that I've been following on LinkedIn, a lot of it has stuck with me. The problem is, if I had a better revenue, then I could build that e-fund. But nobody seems to want to take the 5 to 10 minutes to listen and understand that. And then part of what I was reacting to is another good point that we can discuss that I think I probably encountered from, learning about, in the social work room, is not just the uplifting part of it. Mentor versus somebody who's too quick to listen to give advice. I don't want your advice unless you're willing to mentor. If you don't want to mentor and you just want to cover my food and drinks, then what use do I have for you at this point? Other than basically, I'm getting the impression, while you support me, you don't. And then the second thing was, because all of us, including your authors, have reasonably large social media presences. I conducted a poll, and then I did a video follow up, which I tagged both you in, so you can take a look afterwards. But basically, he said to me, going back to that first comment, social media is part of your mental health issues. I'm like, no, because you just invited me to your wedding last year when you knew damn well everybody is 15 to 20 years ahead of me, and you're blaming my issues on comparing myself to social media when I was at your wedding as your groomsman. Seriously. Where's the mental health disconnect? Oh, yeah, it's number two. It's not number one. Number one, I can just basically cringe at what I look at when somebody's being over the top with their content and laugh at it because they're just trying to get a sale at that point.
Yeah, I will say it's geared to a few different things, but just to speak real quickly, in terms of like the age difference, I don't know how old your friend is that got married.
38.
Okay. people do things at different stages. And I think that's one of the largest things that, regardless to what color you are or maybe culture you come from, are significantly impactful. When I was in my 20s, several of my friends got married. At the time, I was single, and I was like, oh, you'll find someone, you'll play catch up. I'm running my own race. I didn't get married until I was 35, and I'm okay with that. But there were other people that was like, oh, and you still have time to have a kid. There's always going to be these connotations that some other individuals will try to place upon you, not you specifically, but in general, for a variety of different reasons. So it's just really.
That was the number three thing that he's been. That was the number three thing that, and sorry for cutting you off, but that was the number three thing that he was on me about. I'm like, dude, I'm not in the right financial situation just yet to be able to look for someone. That's the first problem with dating nowadays. If you're not, I mean, first and foremost, an analogy I'm going to use, you'll understand this: income equals access. Part of my reaction and what I'm also getting from some of your different stories, a lot of it has to, socioeconomics plays a huge part in this. So when I said, when I'm going to circle back to what we were touching on, which is the problem for him where daddy got him into his occupation. I didn't have that. So
not either.
So unfortunately, like you, I had to go through the I have to go through the ATS for everything, or have a recruiter get me to an interview. Whereas if I stayed in that community, it would have been different. But who knows at this point?
Yeah.
The point is, when we talk about support, I've noticed the theme in this book, in some of the different stories as well, the theme of support. How do you best support someone, especially someone who's neurodivergent as well? Do you support them by taking them out for food or drink? Honestly, that gets old after a while. The wedding last year, kind of wanted to throw it back in his face and say, you chose to do that. It was important enough for you to have me there. I supported you on this. The minimum that you can do right now is support me in what I'm doing, not just subscribe to the channel. If you are going to criticize me and you can't bring me to a room of opportunities the way Madeline and Erica did, then I have less to do with you right now and see you 3 times a year in that case, and cut down the amount of time I spend with you, because I don't want to effing hear this anymore. I'm sorry, but that's what I'm slowly getting to. If this is all this is going to be about, and he can barely understand at minimum, you see that I have a podcast. You see how much work I'm putting into it. You all criticize me on why am I helping people so much online? Because this is how you create opportunities for yourself. I will reference the fact that almost the next time he wants to say that almost all of you showed me another way, because he actually asked me, in regards to author number 2, what has she taught you? He actually had the nerve to ask me that, and I'm like,
how to wanted you to quantify it. Okay. So that's also showing defense. He was feeling defensive because you have demonstrated the ability to cultivate a community, or begin to cultivate a community, where you're receiving the things that you've been looking for. One of the things that I really appreciated from when you came on my podcast was identifying the experience that you had in the educational system and why we need to throw the whole thing away, because we're not being served properly. And the same thing goes with support.
We also need to do this with the job market. We also need to with the job market, because, by the way, speaking of author number 2, she did something. I'm going to get to that in a moment. She said to me, I was hurt to hear that you feel failed. When I said that on your podcast, and she listened to it, and you know who I'm talking about, she came to me with this: would you be willing to put together a training for my therapists at my co-founded clinic? And I said yes. And she was like, if you can make it up to 30 to 40 slides, we'll pay you for an hour's Zoom. Now, why won't my old friends do things like this? That's the bigger question. That doesn't make me angry at them. It makes me take a second look at them. It's like, you all have the time. You know I'm struggling. You know I want to be doing freelance and other things. Why doesn't it process in you? You can all make a difference, but you're allowing other people who've known me for less time to help me find these opportunities, and you're sitting there and you're doing nothing.
I wish I had one concrete answer for that, but
I'm not
that is a
looking for
good
an
question
answer,
to
but
ask.
I'm actually not looking for an answer.
Oh,
That's for the audience. It's
but
to
yeah, that is a
basically,
good question to ask.
it's a societal question. If the if one theory that I have from not just reading the book, from reading some of the select stories, having a few, you and your fellow co-authors on here that I've learned is this: the opportunities, even said by Robert Kiyosaki himself, like Trump, who's 77, borderline 78, and they're old men. The opportunities are online. Stop stop trying to, and in this friend's case, well, I'm super Gen X. You're just a millennial because you're always on your phone doing this or that. I'm like, dude, I don't have our old community anymore to help me find jobs. I have to create it. If you at minimum can't understand that, then you are a complete moron.
And it's also possible, be that as it may, it is also possible that some of these other individuals are unwilling to identify the fact that the landscape is changing and you have to be consistent about what is changing and how it can benefit you and how you can utilize it. So
Okay, well, there's a mortgage broker on Instagram named Andrew F. Smith who put out a reel over the weekend about this is tied to what you just said. Anyone who bought a house before 2020. So this was basically Gen X and anyone who was and anyone in our age group's age who got married, basically purchased their house, before this whole mess. They're the ones with wealth. Anyone who tries to now do it afterwards, which unfortunately will be me, and I don't know how long this is going to take, I'm either going to have crappy mortgage interest rates, I'm going to need another income or two, and we don't know what housing prices are going, if they're going to continue to go up, they're going to peak and go down, or they're going to stay the same. But because it's New York, yeah.
I will say I was in that group because I purchased my home in closed May of 2021. And I will be honest, I got an interest rate that I will never see in my lifetime. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't think of necessarily buying a home. But once I saw the amount of money that I was saving while in quarantine, thinking about what can I do to kind of further ahead, but I wouldn't necessarily qualify myself as wealthy because I owe over $100,000 in student
No, but
loan
at
debt.
least you got to purchase a home because
And that's the thing, at least
you're in a better
that's how I
position.
look at it.
I will be able to purchase a condo or a co-op, but this is going to take probably about
Yeah.
10 years. So I'll be part of that post 2021 group. And in fact, honestly, at this point, this is why it probably sounds like it, but you're much more empathetic and sympathetic to it. I'm fuming furious with, some of my older friends. I love them. They will always be a part of my life, and I will make time where I can for them, but I'm fumed.
Because a lot of where they are coming from and what has been communicated with you is not aligning with the reality of where you are and what you're trying to achieve. And that can be really challenging, especially with people that you've had these relationships with. In some ways, you have grown together, but are growing in different directions, especially when individuals aren't trying to accurately understand where you're coming from, which is a big part of the work that I do with some of my clients. It's just like, okay, you do not have this point of reference, and that's what it is. But what are you trying to do about it? What is going to look different? How might you feel a little bit uncomfortable to really grasp what is going on with someone else? And even if you don't, and this is what grinds my gears, if you don't know how to support because your own cognition is not allowing you to come up with options for another person,
That's why I do
ask
this at this
them.
point.
Ask, how
That's why
can I best support you?
That's what
What can I do?
I've made this clear to him before in the easiest, simplest way, because we do have some friends of ours who you will probably eventually meet, on the panels when I start, doing panels, or actually teachers.
Okay. I love a
So
good educator.
there's a little level of a disconnect with them, but one of the fellow groomsmen who was also a teacher had this to say. And he was a lot more sympathetic because he was diagnosed OCD mid 2014, and he's a fan of therapy and has needed it, for a long time. He said to us, the groom who just got married, do your best to understand this. He will probably still make time for you, but the time is going to be very limited, and he's going to have to learn how to balance and budget his time, especially if he has children with his new wife. And I finally said to myself, I know this. I understand this. And I'll support my friend on this because, but what he doesn't understand is this. I'm still single at 38. And he's trying to tell me when we're at a bar, why aren't you out there, talking with women? This is a good place. I'm like, because they're going to look, because right now, unfortunately, I do not look happy in my life. It's much easier to attract the right people when you are doing better financially. That's probably not something he can process because he never had to worry about that because daddy got him his job. If he had to do what you and I did, he would understand. And even my editor, who's also my co-founder on this out in Los Angeles, who decided as a film editor to not work corporate, best just said it himself. I'm going to read to you, and to the audience what my editor, who's also my best friend, said. And by the way, he's progressive. Let me just tap this open. Hold on. Because this adds to the conversation and it kind of sums it up. And then I have a couple questions I just want to ask related to the book. Okay. Hold on. Okay, here it is. Okay. I'm not going to read the series of rants, but basically he said, you don't have to apologize. This seems to be very upsetting for you. And then these two comments stood out to me the most. I'm sorry about that. That seems really frustrating. Sometimes we have to resign to the fact that some people won't change.
It's hard to accept something like that, especially when we have history with people and we're able to see the potential in growth and the frustration when we realize that they're not going to tap into that potential.
And he said something to me about our best friend, which also resonated with me, but it wasn't in that particular set. He said, I think it was a month back, if we put the groom in my situation, he would understand.
Yes, he might, but he would also struggle with navigating that because it's very foreign.
Yes, because it means you wouldn't have somebody to help you, get a start in your career. It would mean you don't have you're not able to afford decent housing. Decent housing basically for somebody on low wages is like catch up.
Yeah.
We know the area is expensive, but still, and that's a whole nother panel discussion conversation.
Everywhere is expensive. Everywhere.
Yeah, that's the problem because everyone wanted to move to Texas and Florida and then drove the prices up.
Oh, and Atlanta. Don't forget Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, that first. Okay. When Erica approached you to be a co-author, what were your first thoughts about it, and what had she pitched to you about telling your story?
To be honest with you, when she first reached out to me, because I knew who she was, we had never met in person. So at first I was like, oh my God, Erica Sandoval knows who I am. So that was my first reaction. But my second one was that it was a wonderful project and something that was very well needed. And could be very well received, not just by, the current social work community, but students, emerging social workers, and those even thinking about coming into the field because of, the uniqueness of our stories. So, I did want to hear more information, but like I was interested. But the caveat for me after I got off the phone was I made, and this also speaks to some of what came up for me in the book surrounding identity. I was just like, does she know that I have West Indian parents, that I am Black and not Latinx? And if she does know that, doesn't rather, would she still want me in the book? Because my husband's last name is Perez. So I've hyphenated. So I didn't know if it was an assumption or if she knew, or if based on the work that I was doing, just felt like I would have been a good fit. And I let some of my own personal themes again from childhood come up. So I remember sending her a message saying, hey, like, can we just check in? Because I spoke to my husband about it, and I spoke to another good friend who also is familiar with Erica and her work about it. And they're like, just talk to her. And I'm like, of course, I'm a social worker. I'm a human being. Like, I can have this conversation. So I told her all of these same things that I just said. And what she says to me, it's how you identify. And it, not that it was a weight off of my shoulders, because, I can have hard or challenging or activating conversations every day based on my work, but I didn't want it to be a situation where I was perceived as trying to co-opt into another community. Because to be perfectly honest with you, the only reason I was able to have the experiences that I had and do the personal work I did was because Puerto Rican friends, Dominican friends, Ecuadorian friends that accepted me
That was
when
mentioned
Black
in the
folks didn't,
story from
white
that was
folks
mentioned
didn't.
in your elementary school, by the way.
I'm sorry?
That was mentioned in your elementary school,
Yeah.
as you said in the story. Because it's funny, I had a similar conversation with another friend of mine who I graduated with, same age as me. And when we were speaking about, how everyone else was married and me and him weren't, he was like, this year he even said after viewing my work, he was inspired to finally do his own podcast also.
That's
And he's still
awesome.
single like me, where, he might not have the most popular of opinions, but considering the community he and I both came from. But I said I would like to have you on the show this year. He said, give me some time and maybe we might, circle back to that later this year. Another interesting question is, okay, when did you come up with the idea for your podcast? And what was the whole idea behind it?
Okay, so in May of 2021, I was in a car accident where I was rear-ended. As a result of that, I had 3 herniated discs in my neck and 3 in my back. I could not return to work. I was in a considerable amount of pain, and I just felt frustrated that as a result of someone else's actions, I could no longer live my life. Full disclosure, I did fall into a bit of a depression. My husband, years prior, thought that it would be good for me to have a podcast. And I always said no. I'm like, who's going to want to listen to me have a podcast? Who's going to want to listen to what I have to say? He brought this up that summer. Since I mentioned the accident was May, I'd say July-ish, near the end of July. He brought it up. He was like, I know that it's been challenging for you because you can't work, you can't, see your friends, family, the things that you used to do. But one of the things that you are able to do is still converse with people, still connect with them, things that you like to do. So how about we bring this idea of a podcast back to the table? So that framing opened my idea up to the fact that it could be a possibility for me. So I begun talking to him, like, what would I talk about? Granted, I have a variety of different personal and professional experiences, but like what would really be something that also would keep me engaged? Because as somebody with ADHD, I could pick up a hobby real quick and love it and then drop it and never pick it up again. So if I was going to do this, I wanted to with fidelity. So he's like, well, you're always saying, why don't we talk about this? And you're up in arms because of the stigma of mental health in all communities, not just ours, and the fact that people say things in pockets or they don't feel like they can advocate for themselves and speak out loud. So why don't you do that? So I thought more about it and I was like, I do say, why aren't we talking about this? Or why is this a thing? So that's how we came up with the title. Why don't we talk about this podcast? And initially, I wanted it to be very broad in the sense that, yes, I want to speak with professionals from different communities, but I also recognize that social work has a bad rap. And there are many of us that are pigeonholed and put into, oh, we take people's babies and we do all of these negative things. So I also wanted to highlight the
Yeah, that's
professional
my old
community
community who
I
makes
come
all
from.
those assertions. And quite frankly, it's funny because I would have thought about doing something within this as a career myself, but guess what they all used to do? If I would have ever said the idea, laugh at me. They
Yeah.
laughed at
And
the idea of it because they would typically say, well, it doesn't pay a lot of money. I'm like, what I would say to my old community is this. You all think about money, 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 money. It's great and all, but money shouldn't be the be end
yeah.
all reason. And it's funny, the guy who I was just telling you about, who's still single like me, he had always encouraged me over the years that you should be doing your own show or podcast. It's something that you have a talent for, by challenging societal thought. And then, like you, at after two COVID, after two different COVID stay homes. But 2021, when I was working at Hastings on Hudson, Union Free School District, and then Optum, after both of those, I'm just like, I really got to build and do something for myself because unfortunately, we don't know what the future is going to hold within what I would prefer to be doing. But I'm just tired of I'm tired of being not the industry. I'm tired of working for somebody
Yeah.
and having
And
my
also
wage.
the creative outlets, like a lot of this, and you may be able to identify, for me, it was like a creative outlet, something that I can grow and craft in what I envision, see what's working, make revisions.
Well, referring back to this, I wouldn't have realized people like Erica and Madeline had that level of creativity, or that they've also had TV appearances, in addition within the media, something that my old friends don't have access to. And I'm just like, I'm just going to give you old friends the finger at this point because this new group of people actually has connections into what I would probably prefer to be doing with myself, which is something creative. And guess what? I don't fit the traditional corporate worker. This is probably why I am where I am right now, is because I don't fit the corporate norm.
Okay. And, just to add on to that point, some of us, we try to silence or mask ourselves to be able to fit. And it takes us, and I'm just saying some
That's
of
a
us,
very common
me,
theme with
to figure
neurodivergent.
out, yes,
With
to figure
neurodivergent
out.
or autistic. Like, I remember seeing this poster who basically talked about when everyone was like, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. What do you think us autistic people have to do? We basically have to go through and I'm making a really bad reference about this, but you'll get the analogy. We have to go through the autistic Olympics because y'all want us to be just like you
Yeah.
supposed normal people, but y'all normal people are all undiagnosed.
Yeah, the normie discussion. I was having this with someone not long ago, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't realize that you had masks for so long," because it was something I was speaking about in a presentation. And I was like, "Yeah, because I worked very hard at it, feeling like I needed to fit in. But then when I realized there is no fitting in, because what is that really going to get me? And I am so much more at peace, have less anxiety. And as a practitioner that works with people with anxiety and ADHD, what am I communicating to them by saying it's okay to mask when you're coming to me for help and support?" And I was like, the last thing I want to do as a licensed ethical practitioner is break my own ethics. And I got to tell you,
I used to get told that you should just basically do whatever you have to do to get hired. So if you have to conform, you have to conform. I'm like, no, screw
no.
that. No, because they already know that if I carry an IEP with me, it's viewed as his expense. This is corporate's reaction if I told them, and this personally happened in 2010s. I disclosed in 2015. Interview went south. No feedback afterwards after the interview. No follow-up call. Hey, you didn't get the role.
Yeah.
So basically, when you tell somebody, you know, when you tell somebody disclose, that doesn't help them in the hiring
Yeah.
process. Now it's,
And it's funny you mentioned that
we have to spend money on him now. No, recycle the resume.
or if there is, and I don't know the percentages offhand, but I do know that there's a percentage of individuals that may have disabilities or mental health issues that companies want to say that they have offered opportunities to these individuals.
They
But once
don't.
you pass that threshold, then it's whatever. And then if you have
They
to
don't.
offer
I
scaffolds,
worked for the one thing. I worked for the Goodwill of Greater New York and Northern New Jersey. Honestly, from a resume perspective, working for that type of an organization probably just not only it made it harder for me to get taken seriously doing everything, it didn't do me any favors.
and it's a struggle too, because let's say for the sake of argument, you do apply for a job and you don't check off any of these boxes that you in theory may have a diagnosis or may have a need for, and then it comes up later on, well, you weren't honest on your application. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But me personally, I will check off. I have a traumatic brain injury. I will put that. I have
I've checked off
ADHD. I will put that.
disabilities,
You're not
and
coming
I'm
for
not
me.
getting. I've checked off disabilities, and I'm not getting calls back.
And it's frustrating because if you don't check it off, and then you do get a call, but then you do have a need or you ask for an accommodation, then it also comes back to bite you. So it's just like, what are we actually trying to do here? Because these companies, these networks are not setting up people for success equitably. And that is, well, we could go off on a tangent, but yes, entrepreneurship, not to say that it fixes that, but it does create an avenue for
No,
those of us who
actually, I want to cherry pick off that. We'll end with entrepreneurship or solopreneurship. No, it doesn't fix anything. It it's an outlet to make opportunities. It's an outlet to get yourself out there. It's an outlet to promote yourself, something that you're doing. But most entrepreneurs are correct to say you lose sleep. It's not for everyone. I've even said it myself on my own posts. I don't go, how you see a lot of content creators out there basically giving advice, quit your job, quit your 9 to 5, go become an entrepreneur. Like we've seen people as large as, Grant Cardone say that, which, for some people it'll work, other people it won't. But I don't go around telling people quit your 9 to 5 and do entrepreneurship. In fact, if you pay a little more attention, and I'll do this again, I don't encourage people to go to entrepreneurship. I say this is the only thing that I can take to right now because nobody will see me as anything more than customer service. So how do you sit with that? The only thing all the customer service skills have done for me over the years is allow me to put together a reasonably good podcast. Anything after that, I can't get taken seriously for a project manager, program manager, or analyst roles. I have the skills, but we want this is typical HR corporate whining. Where's your degree? I have 2 degrees. You just won't select me out of your applicant tracking system and talk to me in an interview and get to know me. You're basically letting your applicant tracking system dump my frigging resume. So why would I now want to play your game anymore?
Yeah, you raise good points. And even the companies that have identified that they're removing the bachelor's degree as a requirement for employment, we don't know what else that they are also doing behind the scenes, because that could also be just a catch-all.
Who helps me out with this. We go back and forth on this a lot because he's computer science. Computer science degree won't get anyone taken seriously because it's just a course of study. You're not going to get a job off a computer science degree. You're not, we'll use tech as an example. You're not going to get a job off of tech boot camp. Skills-based hiring would be better if companies could actually do this correctly. but they can't because they're run by freaking morons. I'm gonna leave on this. Solo and entrepreneurship works for people like yourself and me, and your community of authors who are also a combination of clinical therapists and agency executives, because it fits a need, or it fits something that we're advocating for or wanting to discuss. But you ask the average person, no, they want a 9 to 5. They just want the job so they can
Yeah,
get.
they want yeah.
They don't want to do anything else with themselves.
Or the idea of what it would take to build out that infrastructure would be challenging. Like, to be perfectly honest, when I started my first business, I was a school social worker, and that is the community that I wanted to serve. And while I still do that, the only reason that I don't have a traditional job right now is because of that accident that I mentioned. I'm fortunate that I do have the skills and experience to have expanded, since now I have a therapy practice, but not everyone has those skills and abilities or even wants to take that on. Yeah, that would have been great for me to have a pension from the Department of Education, but life circumstances do change that. And part of what is challenging at times is to tap into having that faith and having that resilience to move forward. I don't necessarily know that I'll be successful, but I know that if I don't prioritize my health and my recovery, I'm not going to be good to anyone or anybody. So I have to figure out how to work within those constructs. For a person who has been working their traditional 9 to 5, if they were in a similar situation to me, they may be very stressed out. They may not have a support system. They may not know what to do. And not to say that I have it all figured out, but I think that, part of the superpower of ADHD lets me know that, what, I've bounced back before and I will do it again, even if I have to do it creatively so.
And unfortunately, the very large reason Benjamin doesn't have anything better than customer service is because clearly HR can't figure out it's not his skills. It's they're using the outdated article of the 4 categories that somebody with weak grades who's creative can't fit into an analyst role. And yes, he can. It's just you're either, and I really shouldn't, but honestly, we blame boomers too much for this, which was another point that my friend said. He says you fall too much into that whole generational stereotyping thing. I'm like, no, there was a reason for this. And the author of Strauss How, Neil Strauss, was a boomer himself who was making money off of this. He did the book to talk about the generations, to basically say it was in relation to technology fluency.
I can see that.
Because think about it, our oldest generation in government, Biden and this age group don't know much about cell phones. They have them around, but they set up the technology. Baby boomers, who I think that's your mom and dad, correct? They're probably
Yeah.
around the 70s. Yeah, just like mine.
My mom's 81. And she's come a long way, but she also had to have the desire to want to learn. There are many that have no
Boomers
desire.
knew if they wanted to stay working
And
for
relevant, yes.
relevant, they had to continue to learn all this stuff. But silent generation created the technology. Boomers were more of the pioneers to developers of the technology. Gen X started to introduce more late stuff. I have 2 criticisms on our generation.
Okay.
Number 1, we whined about education for years. And then what did we do? We introduced overpriced tech boot camps that are just as expensive as going to college. That was a dumpster fire it was a good idea, but now it's a dumpster fire. And it doesn't do anything smart by the people that it's trying to serve. Not you, as I just showed you an example with my old crew, we don't help one another out. What we do instead is we basically say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, figure it all out by yourself. But then we bend over backwards for Gen Z. And you can see this all throughout the millennials generation.
Yeah, I can see that. And also one of the things I will say is, and I identify as an elder millennial because I do fall
So do I.
room, but a lot of it too is the unification. And not to say that, all millennials are unified, but they're unified more so that the messaging is consistent and they will double down and not do a thing. They're not going to be bullied and be made to feel like, oh, I can't figure this out.
No, but they also have people within their own age groups who are not all doing so well that they will not, give the helping hand out to. They will overlook that and they will go younger. So, yes, I agree with you in that sense. You know, we need to do more for one another, because if you have somebody like myself and you're saying in my late 30s, I can't learn technology, well, I have to, obviously, to do something like this, do I not?
Mhm. And also the desire. Like another person can say that, but they could be speaking on their own experience or their observation.
Any
You
elder
never know the
millennial,
motivation for someone else or their
last
skills
thing,
and ability.
any elder millennial like you and me who's founded or started tech boot camps, these things are not accessible to somebody in my age group, because the assumption is I don't want to change, or I don't have the situation present to change. Give me a chance. Admit me into your boot camp and see
Yeah.
what I can do, or expand the age difference. Because when you looked at one organization, Europe originally
Familiar.
started by the start of Gen X, who just retired and stepped down from the company. The idea was to help low income. Okay, yeah, but you also have low income in other communities who could benefit from all this, but you're only willing to help people 18 to 25. Why not help? Why not expand? Because there are plenty of people from 26 to 60 who would love, probably more than anything, to do something else with their life.
Yeah, to true access, career change. But just to add another point to what you were saying about the boot camps, if you have an infrastructure where folks are signing up, and let's say for the sake of argument, it's beyond their wheelhouse or it's challenging to navigate, it is the responsibility of the team, the lead, whoever, to reach out to a person that is not logging in, to reach out to a person who may not be completing the modules, to identify, are there barriers? Is there something here that is making it hard for you to access, and what can we do about it, especially if we took your money?
Mm-hmm. And that's last point. And then I'm glad we had this today and you stopped by. Money is always the biggest barrier to change as well, that unfortunately we should be looking at not just lower cost options, but maybe I could say one thing, not just in trainings, I could suggest it, but who's going to take it seriously? How about apprenticing people who are in their early to mid to late 30s? How about saying, okay, are you happy with what you're doing? If the answer is no, sure, we'll make time, after your regular 9 to 5 or on weekends to, apprentice you in something that you would much rather be doing for
That's a
yourself.
great idea, actually,
Yeah, but
because you
nope,
don't hear
that's
of
what I need.
apprenticeships without.
Nobody wants to do that because the government says focus on kids, but they also have a demographic in their statistics that they know are being ignored.
As per usual, you are making really good points, because I remember when I got my first school social work job, which was not something I had wanted at the time, but I got laid off and the opportunity presented itself. Someone said to me, "Oh, that's awesome that you're going into schools, because now you can begin to focus on catching problems before they're too old and they can't be fixed." And I was blown away by that statement, but I know that she was not the only person that believed that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And too many people believe that. So I really appreciate that idea that you have. And I think that between apprenticeships and even like mentorship, because we are in a different space now. Because like I have a mentee who in a room that I was presenting in stood up and asked me to be her mentor. Whereas if I was at her stage, I would have been terrified to ask, because that wasn't where the community was at the time. So even though there has been progression, we can still do a lot more. So I think identifying who in our communities or who we have access to that are willing to, even if it's donate half hour to development, that we need to do a better job of doing that.
Yeah. So thank you for coming by today. And
Of
I enjoyed
course.
my time on your show, and I'm glad you came by today. Have a good
Thank you
rest
for
of the
having
day.
me.
You're
You do the
welcome.
same.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So now I'm going to finish the reaction. So basically, as I hinted at, just doing pick your brains. And I want to thank everyone for coming by. I want to thank Paula for coming on Pick Your Brains. We'll see you in the next one. Now we're going to finish the mental health portion of this. When it comes to old friends, the one simple thing that all they have to do is, as Paula was saying, ask. That's all you have to do. Just ask if you don't understand something. So if somebody's mental health isn't good, that's all you have to do. Ask. I hope you guys learned something from all this. We'll see you soon.